Doctor. Psst. Doctor. He's what? Where? Oh. Doctor!
Oh, God. Coming, dear. Coming. Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, good evening. Yeah, thank you, thank you. Good evening. My name is Dr. Minot Lewis, and this is my wife, Mrs. Mildred Lewis. We have been asked to share our first encounter with the great guru, Swami Yogananda. Oh, one moment, dear. My story begins one fine October day in 1920. As I was leaving my dentist office in Davis Square, Somerville, Massachusetts, walking diagonally across the square, a strange figure passed me.
A fast-moving figure.
He was clothed in...
An orange coat. Oh, sorry, dear. Do go on.
Yes, you were quite right, dear. He was clothed in an orange coat.
Orange petite.
Orange-colored high-lace shoes.
With an orange turban on his head.
Of course, in my surprise in seeing such a figure on the streets of Somerville, Massachusetts, I turned and watched him as he walked diagonally across the square. Little did I realize that it was none other than the great guru, Swami Yogananda, known as that time as Swami Yogananda and later known as Paramhansa Yogananda.
May I?
Yeah, one moment, dear. Although I did not meet the master until Christmas Eve of the same year, Mrs. Lewis actually met him first. Well, actually shook his hand, if I recall.
Yes, I did. In the fall, I attended a lecture at the Rosicrucian Society, where Mrs. Clemens told me that she wanted me to meet someone afterwards. Well, she appeared with this dark-skinned Indian Swami, whose long black hair flowed over his shoulders. He was wearing
an orange coat, orange petite,
orange-colored high-lace shoes with a large orange turban on his head.
Yes.
I was not accustomed to seeing anyone dressed in this fashion, yet I must have been a strange-looking figure to this Hindu Swami, as he was to me. Mrs. Clemens then introduced me to this Oriental, a Swami Yogananda Giri of Calcutta, India. Oh, as I look back, I no doubt must have been so awestruck as to be speechless.
Oh, no.
I had very little to say. But I have never forgotten this meeting. As we said before, Doctor met the master on Christmas Eve.
Oh, yes, I did. Okay. Yes, I made an appointment to meet him at Unity House, Park Square in Boston. I was not enthusiastic about meeting him at this time. Well, for the simple reason that I was somewhat prejudiced. Also, I had heard many stories about the fakirs of India and their strange customs and doings, and I was not about to be fooled or taken in, so to speak, by such people. Nobody is going to hoodwink me. However, as I have said, I condescended to meet the master at this time. And I well remember as I entered the room, he looked at me and gave me a little smile. We exchanged a few greetings and we sat down to discuss various questions along religious lines. I said to him, "Sir, I have looked in many places in scriptures, and I have asked many people the meaning of such passages as, if thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. And I have not been able to receive a suitable answer from anyone I asked, nor has anyone been able to show me such a light. Well, the master replied, quoting Jesus' words, "Can the blind lead the blind? They shall both fall into the ditch." Well, his answer impressed me because it was from our Bible, and it seemed a reasonable answer to my question. Well, being an outspoken American, I said right off, "Sir, have you seen such things? Do you know the single eye?" He smiled and said, "I think so." Well, I said, do you think I could see such things? And he said, "I think so." And I said, "Show me." Well, he smiled and procured a tiger skin and set it on the floor and said, "Doctor, would you mind sitting down in front of me?" Well, he was sitting in the cross-legged position, and I had never, to my knowledge, sat cross-legged in such circumstances before, but I said, "Yes, certainly." Somehow I managed to get down in the cross-legged position, and I assure you it was not the lotus posture. Well, as I was sitting in front of him, he looked me right in the eye, and he said, "Doctor, will you always love me as I love you?" I had never been talked to in such a manner before, but as I looked at him, I saw something I had never seen in anyone before, and so I quickly said, "Yes, I will." As he was sitting across from me, he rubbed his hands together, and he said, "That's fine. I take charge of your life." What he meant by that, I had no idea. But somehow it felt all right, so I acquiesced and we proceeded. I was sitting in front of him, and he pressed his forehead against my forehead. He told me to lift my eyes and look at the point between the eyebrows, which I did. He did not suggest anything that I see or try to influence me in any way by suggestion. What I saw came in a natural way. I was fully conscious, fully awake, fully alert, and I saw the single eye. Because the master stilled the waves of my mind and allowed the inner intuition of my soul to see the doorway to the infinite. That vision has never left me. The master once again touched his forehead against mine. And it was then that I saw the great light of the many-rayed lotus with its many, many rays, its silver leaves, the most exquisite thing that can be seen. Well, after seeing all the wonderful things that I did, I was very grateful to this great master of realization. Then the master said to me, "Doctor, promise me one thing, that you will not avoid me." I was only too glad to promise that, but little did I realize how difficult it would be to not avoid him in the difficult middle ground of discipline. But I kept my promise. and was saved from much suffering and much delusion.
Wonderful, dear.
Thank you.
Well, I need to point out again that meeting the Master happened on Christmas Eve. And it was our custom to decorate the Christmas tree on Christmas Eve. I know that Doctor had an appointment with the Swami and said he would be back in time to decorate the tree. I remember his instructions to have everything ready. But hour after hour passed, and soon it was midnight. I was getting upset. For how were we going to get the tree ready for Christmas, for Santa Claus, before the children came running downstairs? Now I was going to do something about this Christmas tree business. And so I prepared myself. There was a rocking chair in the kitchen, and I planted myself in it. Sweater sleeves rolled up with a rolling pin clutched in my right hand. There I sat. As the clock neared 1 o'clock, I first heard the automobile come into the driveway. The garage doors closed, the door opened, and soon footsteps came from the back hall into the kitchen. I was truly ready to swing that rolling pin. But Doctor came into the room with the most divine smile on his face, as pleasant as could be, in the flow of being with Master. And so, I could not touch him. I dropped the rolling pin. Mind you, there were words all right, but that was all. And just for the record, the Christmas tree got put up and trimmed in plenty of time, and Santa Claus did arrive before the children awoke.
There is a story that Master used to tell from the lecture platform. The moral of the story is when you are in God's light, nothing, not even a wrathful wife with a rolling pin, can harm you.
Now, I was still very irritated with the Master after the Christmas tree incident. Soon after New Year's, Doctor and I arrived at Mrs. Hasey's house on a cold winter's night and took off our wraps. I was escorted into the parlor, and right in front of me sat Swami Yogananda. This was most upsetting. Dr. and Mrs. Hasey had arranged this meeting without my knowledge. Well, after the rolling pin incident, I had said I was never getting messed up with any religion, and no Hindu. Master called me into a private meeting, which lasted only a few moments. When I came out, I was in tears. I don't recall what happened, but I knew later that his spiritual power had completely transformed my consciousness. A wonderful relationship between us had been established, and I became a disciple. My loyalty and devotion has been unwavering ever since. The doctor always said that his first year with Master was his first real Christmas. And in the years to come, we always spent our Christmas with Master in celebration of that first meeting. Doctor, should we tell them the story? The one where we pulled the joke on Swamiji? You know, where we tied a string to his ankle and then to the doorknob so that when he awoke...
Oh, well, perhaps some other time, dear. Yes.
Oh, wait a minute. What about the time that you were caught in that terrible storm in your boat and you almost drowned? And if you finally remembered to center your consciousness in the Om.
Oh, well, that was a good one, dear, but perhaps some other time.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Buchanan. However, Swami Yogananda has given me the name Kamala, and this is what I go by. There are crossroads in a person's life which can completely change the direction of travel. For me, this was the hour of first seeing my guru. His precepts were to highlight my journey upon a way that led my heart and my thoughts Godward. That evening was January 13th, 1925. A very eventful day in my life. The Philharmonic Auditorium in Los Angeles was full to its 3,000 capacity, and everyone had come to hear the certain words of an emissary from India. From that land where sages have been nurtured throughout the ages, we were blessed to know one of her most illumined. Now, Swami Yogananda came upon the platform, his orange robes identifying him with an ancient order of renunciates. My spontaneous first impression was youthfully recorded in my diary. I wrote that his smile was like the sunshine of a soul. His smile was so joyous, and it conveyed a warmth that seemed to envelop everyone present. How did I happen to be there, you might wonder? It was my mother, Dr. Frances Grant Buchanan. She had seen billboards with his picture. Her interest was, well, it was based on a respect for the teachings of India, and she was seeking truth. Was I also seeking truth? I was only 19. But when I saw him, I thought, now, I have found one who could answer any question that I might ever want to ask. His public lectures always included a fund of enthralling and unforgettable stories. Once, he shared with us that in his youth, he'd been extremely thin, and that his present weight had come as a blessing of healing from his own guru. He was aware that here in the Western world, saintliness is usually associated with thinness, even to the point of emaciation. And so it was with his keen sense of humor that he explained to all of us that in India, it is desirable to be pleasantly plump because a thin teacher is a walking advertisement for their scarcity of students. On another occasion, he invited everyone present to come up to the lecture dais and to touch his arms, which he caused to vibrate with energy. It was really in the manner of an electrical machine. On another occasion, In the middle of one lecture, he asked if there were any physicians in the audience, and then he invited 2 of them to join him up on the stage. He wanted to demonstrate how he could control his own heartbeat. He had one physician stand on either side of him, and he allowed them to take his pulse, one from each wrist. Now, as they simultaneously tracked his heartbeat, they observed different counts on each side of his body. And then in the middle of this demonstration, he stopped his heartbeat altogether. And then he stopped his breath. You should have seen the shocked look on these doctors' faces. It was unforgettable. It was about 9 months after I first began attending his lectures that I had my first conversation with him. I had gone backstage, and I saw him standing off by the wings. I observed his gentle dignity and the reserve that was always so natural with him. This teacher was revered in my heart and mind in a way that I couldn't explain. I understood later that this is the feeling of the disciple for the guru. On that occasion, I decided to approach him, and he greeted me. And during our conversation, he offered me counsel. He said to me, "Always keep your dignity and remember your power of thought and of will." As I prepared to take my leave, I asked for his blessing, and he placed his hand on my head and prayed silently. At first, I felt deep stillness, and then it was as though a sacred joy began to fill me as my spirit was lifted in the most immense peacefulness. It wasn't long before my mother and I developed a divine friendship with Swami. In fact, it was midsummer when there was a knock at our door. And Swami, smiling, was there with us. We, of course, felt so blessed to have him with us in our little cottage in Manhattan Beach. We were aware of his great spiritual stature, and yet his simplicity of manner allowed our very special respect for him to blend naturally with the friendship that he gave us. Those days were sunny, they were warm. He loved to swim at the beach. Once he left with our chauffeur, and he stayed in Pismo Beach for 3 days. When they returned, the chauffeur took my mother aside, and he said to her in a very perplexed tone, "Ma'am, I don't really know what he was doing, but, he just went out to the sand dunes and he sat there, facing the ocean. And he stayed there all day long, every single day." You know, one facet of Master's true saintliness lay in his willingness and his ability to meet the constant demands of public life and to cope with every duty, and yet to stay permanently in the sanctuary of inner beatitude. Here now, though, with us, he could roam in the cosmic vastness without even a part of his mind having to turn towards the multitudinous affairs of his daily life. As Jesus went to the mountaintop to pray, my guru had gone by the ocean to commune with his Heavenly Father. During his time with us, we often went on scenic drives, which were very beautiful and the setting for great spiritual inspiration. On one of these scenic drives, I was sitting in the back seat of the car next to Master when he entered a state of samadhi. Outwardly, his body became very still. His consciousness completely interiorized. I was aware of this, and when we returned to the house, my mother and the chauffeur, they just got up and they went indoors. But I hesitated. I didn't know what to do. I thought, well, perhaps he would like someone to stay and remain with him. Or maybe he wanted to be alone. I sat with this dilemma for a little while, and I decided that I would stay, but only for a short time. So I sat very quietly next to him, and then I got up, and I also went inside. If only I had understood what an incredible blessing it is for a disciple to remain in the Guru's presence and to receive the blessings of being so near. But what can you do? Also, during his time in our home, he had a small autograph book in which he often inscribed thoughts and prayers. He gave this to me. I'll read to you one of his inscriptions. Wherever in this house I have prayed, I leave an everlasting altar of devotion built in the invisible ether, wherein ye shall find him always. In these self-same places quickly delve deep within yourself with reverence and with steady concentration, and ye shall find that secret altar. Master often traveled on lecture tours all across the country. Once, when he returned from an extended tour, he brought back with him mangoes for all of us. This was his favorite fruit. He also brought with him recordings of the music of India and also the music of Amelita Galli-Curci. She was a very well-known opera singer and one of his disciples. And he absolutely loved listening to this music. We, of course, loved to listen and share in his joy. One evening, after a lively conversation about Shakespeare, he delighted everyone by getting up and performing a dramatic portrayal of Antony's famous oration from Julius Caesar. It was a flawless reading, done by candlelight. Even still, it wasn't long before all of our thoughts had turned away from Antony's famous strains and all other earthly drama, and we had centered ourselves for meditation. During another of his lecture tours, he'd been gone for about a year, just under a year. I had to be hospitalized. I had recently had surgery, and I spent the subsequent 7 months in a full body cast. I will never forget the day that my mother walked into my hospital room with an expression of delight on her face. I knew that my guru had returned, and I could feel the radiance that his ever-present bliss state imparted. He brought me English toffee and a curry dinner that he had personally prepared for me. I've known God's healing to reach many people through the channel of my enlightened guru. And although I was in a great deal of pain, I never sought nor asked any kind of healing. This is because I have asked God to bring all of my karmic debts into this lifetime so that I can pay them and be free. I may have invited much, considering our many past lives. On another occasion, when Master was visiting with me in the hospital, he was sitting in a chair next to my hospital bed. In the middle of our conversation, he turned and he looked at me and he said, "I see marriage for you." Years later, the conditions that he described upon meeting my future husband, Edward, happened exactly as he had foretold. And later, when I was the first woman ordained as a minister for self-realization fellowship, Edward and I had the great privilege of running a center for Master in Oakland, California. I have been blessed with many sacred experiences in my life. One morning, a group of us disciples had gone out to the entrance of Mount Washington to bid goodbye to a departing guest. As we were returning, we saw Master sitting out on his balcony in the morning sunlight. He greeted some of the disciples and they responded, speaking to him quietly. I stood back a bit from the group, though, looking carefully at Master to be sure of what I saw. It was unlike any vision that I had formerly known. But as I looked at him, I saw that he was blue-colored. Not an aura, but the very texture of his skin was that mystic Christmas blue, the vibratory color of Christ consciousness. In that moment, I understood that Master was complete. He was one with Krishna and with Christ. And it was by his grace that I was blessed with such a vision. Early in his life, he tells us that he was given a preview of 2 pathways and the privilege to choose which of them he would follow. One was for a meditative life along the river Ganges in India without any physical pain or suffering. The other was to come here to America to offer spiritual guidance to countless thousands, and yet he would experience great physical suffering near the end of his life. You and me, we are so blessed that his decision was for our benefit. And for the countless thousands who, in the future, through his teachings, will find their way also to God.
Hello. I was born Florina Alberto Dufault on November the 8th, 1903, in a French settlement in Iron Mountain, Michigan, where we only spoke French. I was the youngest of 5 brothers and 5 sisters. And I don't remember anything about my childhood, except what I was told, and that I was always sick, and I was a great deal of trouble for my mother. My aunt once said that she was feeling so sorry for my mother, she was carrying me as a babe to be baptized at our church. It was winter, and there was ice all around. And a thought crossed her mind. What would happen if I accidentally slipped and put this one out? Wouldn't that be so much easier for my sister? She said she was just kidding. She was glad it also did not happen, because I was a great deal of help to my mother. I cooked and cleaned by her side. In fact, I couldn't bear to have her out of my sight in case something might happen to her. And I would walk every morning in the dark with her to Mass, because I couldn't bear to have her walk by herself. Later, I asked Master, why was I born into a Catholic family? And he said, it was because of your devotion. When my mother died, I prayed I too would die. So I became very ill. But my life was spared because Master intervened. As he was a dream vision, and I was laying on my bed, and I thought it was a woman because he had long hair and a robe. And he sat right next to me, and he lifted me up sideways so our hearts were even. And I could feel from his heart this electric wave that passed into my heart, through my body, and out my toes. And he laid me back very gently, and I looked at him shocked, and I said, am I dead? And he said, no, you are not dead. But then he looked at me carefully. He said, but what is the matter with your eyes? He took his 2 fingers, he poked them right through my eyes. I did not know anything was physically wrong with my eyes. But I felt that same electric wave pass through my body and out my toes. But to this day, 2 things happened. I do not have to wear glasses, and it opened my spiritual eye. I physically saw Master for the first time on December 19th, 1927, in a lecture hall in Detroit, Michigan. I sat spellbound, looking at the most beautiful man I had ever seen, with his long hair flowing over his shoulders, his orange robe. And he had these large, lotus, dark, expressive eyes. He was playing his harmonium. Oh God, beautiful, oh God, beautiful. Do you know he gave me that very same harmonium years later? Well, I'd never heard chanting before. It fascinated me to the core. I always thought of God as Jesus without ever the hope of finding him. But this chant, it spoke of a God that was tangible. So for the next 2 years, I took lessons with Brahmachari Narod, exercises, the printed lessons, the meditation techniques. And Master came again in 1928, and he came again in 1929. And between that time, well, I had gotten married to Mr. Darling. But the doctor said I still had issues with my health and I should move to a warmer climate. So I chose Los Angeles. And in 1929, Master shook hands with everybody in the audience. He came to me. I said, I am going to Los Angeles soon. And he said, oh, when you go, you must come to Mount Washington and visit us. I was so happy he invited me. So, on November the 8th, 1929, my husband, as a birthday gift, gave me a bus ticket to Los Angeles. And I stayed at the YWCA. Later, Mr. Darling lovingly gave me up for a life of service to God and Guru. Every day, I'd walk that long, winding road up to Mount Washington. But the minute I would begin to put my foot just on that hill, I could feel the Om coming over me, as if Master himself were beckoning me. It was about the second day I had arrived, and I went into the lobby. I saw no one, so I went into the kitchen. There was Master. He was standing against the stove, and he said, well, where have you been? I said, YWCA. I advanced to shake his hand. Again, that same electric wave went through my body. He told me later that at that instant he recognized me as one of the many faces he had seen in a vision before arriving on the shores of America in 1920. So Master asked me to stay for dinner. And so I began to help, washing pots and pans and whatnot. And all of a sudden I feel very ill. So I left the kitchen. I met Brahmachari Narod in the hallway. He had now moved to Mount Washington, and I said, I do not feel well, and I must leave because I cannot be of any use to anyone. And he said, why don't you just lay down in the girls' room for a while and just relax until dinner time? I said, no. I cannot be a burden to anyone. And so I left. Master said later, he was so disappointed I had left. He thought, what is this, Lord? Is she turning away so soon after returning home? He said, I was making this dinner in honor of your homecoming after incarnations of absence. Had I known that, I would have stayed, whether it cost me my life. This is one time that ignorance was not bliss. About a month later, I moved into Mount Washington. And every Thursday afternoon we had meditation. So this Thursday, after meditation, Master told stories. There's a fire crackling in the fireplace. He said good night to everybody, told them to leave, asked me to stay. So I sat very quietly next to him. He turns to me suddenly, he says, Ma Durga. And this unexplainable thrill went through my body. He said, Ma Durga was a name I'd given you in a previous lifetime, where we were together in an ashram in India. He said, you cooked for me too, and you were a nun. So you see, to Master, this incarnation was just a continuation of that previous incarnation. Oh, I remember this one time Master introduced me, another woman named Carla, as musicians. And I pulled Master aside very quickly. I said, Sir, why did you introduce me as a musician? You know I do not know one note from another. And he said, well, Carla, she's a child protégé. But she cannot play my chants because there are no notes. If she could play them, she would play them perfectly. But it would not come from her heart. That is why I want you to always come from your heart, your mind, and what naturally comes to you from me. So I always play the Master's Sankirtans, meditations. I sing, I play the harmonium and the big drum. One time I was preparing vegetables for a banquet, and I was thinking, when one sincerely yearns for God, he manifests himself as a blessed guru. So I'm scrubbing away, preparing these vegetables, and I was singing the chant door of my heart. And I came to the verse, wilt thou come, just for once come to me. And I turned, and there was Master. He was standing right beside me. He said, I have come. I have come. There is this incident. I'll never forget it. It was June 1948. One by one, all the disciples ended up in Master's room. And when I came in, he said, Durga, sit a distance away from me. Divine Mother does not want you to touch me. And he began to speak of his love for Divine Mother. And she, in turn, she used his voice to speak to us, so all of us could hear. And we began to take dictation because this lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. And at one point, she called us all up by name. She told us all our faults. Well, when it came to my turn, I got a scolding I shall never forget. Divine Mother just took me over the carpet. She says, Durga, you have been very selfish. You did not give up your room for a guest. Well, Master's tender heart came to all of our defense. He said, please do not punish her, Mother. Durga is very unselfish. She is my pal. She takes on the sins of others. Please do not punish her. Well, you can imagine how remorseful we all felt. We just cried for those 3 days and 3 nights till we were almost just listless as can be. Well, it was my turn to take dictation. So I'll tell you a little background story. Master asked me to do many different jobs. I never turned him down. I always said yes. Very, very difficult ones at times. Well, this time I worked in the office. Master got a note from a worker saying she did not like my actions and that I was uneducated and ignorant. Master showed me the note and I said, well, I am uneducated. I have no formal education. He said very defiantly, you may be uneducated, but you are not ignorant. Look at me. I do not know English beyond the parts of speech, but look what the Lord has written through me, and you will write too. So it was my turn to take dictation. There's this little crack of light through the closet, and so I had to write for a very long time. Longhand. Divine Mother said, June 8, 1948. An ignorant but loving God secretly dictates to an intellectual ignorant myself. Master said Divine Mother wanted me to know that I was not ignorant, because it was me who was asked to take dictation and not her. On that fatal March 7th, 1952, I was in Encinitas with Roger C. We got a phone call, 9:45 a.m., saying that Master had passed and he had entered Mahasamadhi. We called Dr. and Mrs. Lewis, and the four of us traveled through the night to Mount Washington, arrived at 4 o'clock a.m. I broke the long silence by saying, I would give anything to see Master sitting on the edge of his bed, his little legs swinging, greeting us all, one by one. But it was not meant to be. How can one speak of a sorrow so deep that not even a whisper can loosen its roots? We walked in and showed our outward sorrow, and I sat down next to him and I patted his divine face. And all of a sudden this peace came over the room. Everybody felt it. And it was only then that I could appreciate this blissful little look on his face and his pudgy hands and feet that were still so soft and pliable. We wanted to make sure before we took him to Forest Lawn, that he had just not entered Samadhi. So we agreed that we would whisper the mantra he had taught us to bring him back into outer consciousness. It was my turn first, so I whispered into his ear. And I heard his voiceless voice say, "Why do you want me to come back in this old carcass?" And I said, "Because we are selfish, sir." And he said, "Leave it to Durga to tell the truth." Master says, I am Om. Everything is Om. I will enter the body of Rajasi and into the consciousness of everyone. There are no words to express the feeling of seeing that divine face for the last time. My only consolation is this, what Master often said to me: I will go ahead to prepare a better place for you all, where we will meet again in greater glory.